The opinions or beliefs expressed in this podcast do not necessarily represent the opinions or beliefs of the Church of God or Lee University. For more information, contact Steve Hall at shall@leeuniversity.edu. Welcome to the Charismatic Contemplative Podcast, where the fast and loud embraces the slow and quiet.
Hey, welcome to the Charismatic Contemplative Podcast, a place where the fast and loud meets the slow and quiet. That's not typically something that integrates together. Often people gravitate towards one or the other, and this is an opportunity for whether you are a pastor or parishioner, this is an opportunity for us to dialogue and talk about the importance of integration, particularly the charismatic personality of a Christian or a church, and the contemplative personality of a Christian or a church. What can we do to benefit from each other rather than living in silos? How can we integrate together? We are coming to you from the Lee University Media Studio, and this really is an offering from the School of Theology and Ministry to have this integrated conversation for something that we believe is really important for the 21st century church. And that is that we glean from both ends of the spectrum in integration. Rather than separation, disintegration, we look for integration. And so we're thrilled that we're able to do this from Lee University and the School of Theology of Ministry, always contextualized with regard to the Church of God, which is a charismatic Pentecostal denomination. And so we come at it from that particular angle. So today we're discussing something that I think is really important with regard to integration. And often charismatics tend to lean in one direction and contemplatives tend to lean in another direction with regard to personality. Individual Christians have a certain personality and individual churches have a certain personality. And the personality types we're talking about is extroversion and introversion. And I can't think of anyone better to join me today to talk about this than my wife, LaDon. LaDon and I have been together for 40 years now, 38 years married, 40 years together, and we have had to figure out this integration between extroversion and introversion, and I thought it would be a fantastic opportunity for us to dialogue together in front of you in order to show that these personality differences also relate to the larger church, like in charismatic contemplative. However, what we've experienced in our own recognizing each other not as liabilities but as counterbalances, we really believe that the charismatic and contemplative, the extroverted and introverted of the Christian faith can really counterbalance each other in the individual's life and in the church's life. So welcome, LaDon. Why don't you just greet the folks?
Thank you. It's so nice to be here. I'm looking forward to talking about this with you. We talk about it all the time at home anyway. So
yes, we do. We certainly have had this conversation many, many times,
yes,
independent of cameras and lights and
right,
microphones. So this is the first time we've ever had this conversation like in public.
True.
So I hope it goes well.
I do too.
So just a little bit about yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your own like kind of life trajectory, just briefly, you know.
Well, I
describe
was
yourself.
Born and raised into a minister's home.
Okay.
My dad was a pastor evangelist. He was an overseer. He missionary. We were missionaries for a while. So I am a preacher's kid, and then of course married you and
Yes,
pastor's wife.
Yes. How long have you been in ministry?
I've been in ministry 63 years.
Wow. 63 years.
63 years. If you count the day I was born,
Yes.
and then going to youth camp with my parents, and of course.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, when you were born, your first activity as a family was going to camp meeting or something.
Youth camp.
Youth camp.
Youth
Oh,
camp.
You were born and went straight to youth camp.
Yep, 2 weeks later.
Yes. All right. Now, help me with this. What is your understanding of yourself personally as an extrovert or an introvert? Describe yourself. Talk to me about that journey.
Well, I have always been, said that I was an extrovert. I'm an extrovert. But I think as I've gotten older, I have gone more to the line of almost tipping over into an introvert.
Wow.
And I don't know if that was because when I was younger, being in a pastor's home, that I felt that that I needed to be an extrovert. I'm not sure how that happened, but I think I'm kind of on the line right now.
Yeah. When I first met you, and even today, I would describe you as a sparkler. If you think of a sparkler, it just attracts everyone's attention.
So
when
not
you
good
no, that is good because it's positive.
Well,
I mean, everybody loves a sparkler. So when you walk into the room, it's like a sparkler just came into the room. So that's a reality for me. So take that as a compliment, if you will. And so, how would you describe me? A burned out sparkler.
No, I would describe you as an introvert, although when I first met you, an introvert because you gain your energy from one-on-one.
Oh, that's good, yeah.
You gain your energy from one-on-one, and that's kind of the definition, isn't it?
Yes.
Of an introvert. But I think as time has gone by, I see you being an extrovert when you need to be. I don't know that you gain energy from crowds still. I think you still are the one-on-one, but I do see you as being more of an extrovert whenever you need to be.
Yeah, I noticed that in myself. And for those that don't know, I currently serve as the associate professor of pastoral ministry at Lee University in the School of Theology and Ministry, and for 38 years served as a pastor in the field. However, part of my background, a significant part of my background, is in the field of mental health. I was the clinical director of a counseling center for 13 or so years, and that counseling center is still going on. We had several therapists in there, and my background taught me that the basic definition between an introvert and an extrovert is this idea of gaining energy. Where do you get your energy from? Are you energized by being with other people in larger groups, or are you energized with being in smaller groups or alone, even as individuals? And so if I hear you correctly, and I know you get your energy more from being in the corporate or the larger group setting, and I get my energy from being in a smaller group setting, but yet you're describing this integration over time. Am I hearing that correctly?
You are. And I think that has to do with being a pastor's wife. Over time, needing to be the extrovert when I needed to be, but also realizing that being in the crowd, you can also escape a little bit and be to yourself. And I would find myself doing that later on in life, taking the back seat.
And so I think you see me now as being someone who is...
Yeah, we've switched places, I think, in a lot of ways, yeah.
Yeah, well, maybe we've both matured.
Yeah.
And part of the classic Myers-Briggs understanding is that over time, people generally in maturity modulate towards the middle,
balance.
Which would be balance.
Right.
And that's exactly what this podcast is all about, helping us understand that being to one extreme or the other is potentially what the Scripture was talking about regarding a false balance. However, a balance being both and is in the middle and seems to give more of a dynamic variety or range of even spiritual expression. And so how can we, as what I would describe you as a flaming extrovert in our early life,
right,
and me as a flaming or smoldering introvert in our life, we've grown towards balance.
Yeah, I think so.
I would say that would be accurate. So in thinking in terms of introversion and extroversion, which Christian faith stream or which Christian person, a charismatic or a contemplative, would be more extroverted? A charismatic or a contemplative?
I would think the charismatic.
Tell me why you would think that. What do you see about a charismatic, the church or a person that...
Because I see that when the charismatic people come together, Pentecostals come together, they gain their energy from each other in their forms of expression of worship.
Yeah. They gravitate towards
They do.
larger scale events, more corporate events, it seems like.
It does seem that way. It seems that the personality is drawn to that.
So-
More of an extrovert is drawn to more of a charismatic.
Yeah.
It seems that way.
No, I love that perspective. And that's how you would identify a charismatic as extroverted, getting their energy from being together. Would you say that's
I would
accurate?
think so.
I mean, in my own experience, you're 63 years in a charismatic tradition. I'm not. I didn't grow up in any church tradition.
Right.
I don't have a charismatic or Pentecostal background.
Right.
I kind of came to it very late in my early 20s.
Right.
And then basically decided, I love LaDon, so I love the Church of God. too.
Well, Lee University actually
yeah.
introduced you to the Church of God. But yeah, I am Pentecostal to the bone, to the my marrow, and I am Church of God. I've been Church of God my whole life. I'm actually 5th generation Church of God.
Wow. So
So-
you got deep roots in the
Deep
extroverted,
roots.
charismatic
Correct.
tradition.
Correct.
And so I don't. So I naturally gravitate to less of that. But if I can recall correctly, it seems like charismatics can't wait for camp meeting.
Of course.
I mean,
Charismatics, of course, and Pentecostals, yes. Camp meeting is where you come together and you're very expressive in your worship, and you receive very expressive messages.
yeah, and
Yeah.
energy.
And
from being in
energy.
the
That's the word, energy,
okay.
yes. I
Yeah.
should have said that.
So being in a charismatic big meeting is super.
It's a lot of energy, a
There's
lot of good
there.
energy.
Okay,
Yes.
well, okay, so you're saying that the charismatic is the more extroverted, you imagine.
I would imagine.
Yeah, and then the contemplative would be the more introverted. And why would you say you believe that?
I think it's because of the practices,
Oh, okay.
the individual practices that are taught in that.
Yeah, which tend, if I hear you correctly, tend to gravitate towards individual or alone.
The disciplines, yes,
yeah, the disciplines of the classic contemplative disciplines
are for the individual.
gravitates more towards quiet, slow,
Correct.
separate.
Well, that's my interpretation.
Yeah,
Yes.
I know. And my doctorate is in spiritual formation, so I'm saying I'm validating your
Yes.
understanding that
Yes.
much of the practices, perhaps 2/3 of the classic practices, emphasize more of getting your energy from being alone or silent, let's say slow and quiet,
Right.
rather than loud and fast.
Right.
So that's how I see it, and I'm just identifying with how you see it. Now, you, if I recall correctly, you know how to drive a manual transmission?
Yes, of course. When I was 14 years old, my dad bought me my first
Hold,
car.
hold. I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure. We might get in trouble.
No, I'm still going to tell you. At 14 years old, my dad bought me a car, and it was stick shift, and I drove that car to school. I even drove it to youth camp
Sorry,
with
how old were you?
friends. 14. 14.
At 14, you started driving a manual
Yes.
transmission.
Yes.
Okay, so you know what it means to have a range of gears.
Sure.
Okay, so if you were to get in a car that had a stick shift
Uh-huh.
and it only had 2 low gears, would that be helpful?
No.
Okay.
Would not be helpful.
If you got in a car that only had 2 high gears, would
That
that
would not
be
be
helpful?
helpful either, no.
Okay, so if I hear you correctly,
You need the
we're-
progression. You need
I love that.
the progression.
And neutral is always like right in the middle.
Yep.
Okay, so neutral is always right in the middle. So you can either go low or go high.
You can idle in neutral. You can sit
Yes.
in neutral and go either way.
Yeah.
Whenever you
I
finish.
love that. So let's take that into the soul.
Okay.
Or the spiritual. We're talking about a soul transmission.
Okay.
So talk to me about this. If a soul conceived as a transmission only has 2 low gears,
They're missing out.
I love that. Okay, so let's take it the other direction. If a soul transmission only has 2 high gears,
They might be lacking in maturity.
okay, and at the basic, they're missing out.
They're missing out.
They're just on both ends.
Correct.
They're missing out. I have, unfortunately, heard charismatics say, why would I want to have anything to do with that contemplative stuff over there? That's not the real life and energy of God. And I've had contemplatives say, why would I want to get into that kooky charismatic stuff over there?
Right.
And so it ends up we just operate our soul transmission in 2 gears.
Well, I was one of those.
Tell me a
in the
little more
beginning.
about that.
Well, I'm Pentecostal, I'm telling you,
Okay.
to the bone. And I wanted, and to do the contemplative seemed that I was almost betraying, in a way, my Pentecostal roots. Because,
Wow.
yeah, I felt like it was betraying them. Like, oh my gosh, I'm Pentecostal. This does not feel right.
Ooh, wow, that's an amazing way to characterize that, as if I give myself to practices or
To the disciplines that you talked about.
or a worship service that would be more contemplative.
Correct.
Somehow that's betrayal.
It felt like that a little bit at
That's
first.
amazing. I've heard Catholic people say the same thing about going off to a charismatic church, like, oh no, what are the Catholics going to think about me? And then charismatic saying, oh no, what are these people doing going over there to the contemplative side? And I'm noticing in the contemporary, this cultural moment we're in, it's really interesting how I see denominations or faith streams blending, integrating, rather than maintaining their separateness.
We see it more and more. Yeah.
Yeah, I see it more and more too. We've attended a variety of churches since moving to Cleveland, and all of them have been different, and some of them have blended the charismatic and contemplative, and others have been very much in their own world.
3rd and 4th gear.
Wow. Okay. 1st and 2nd gear churches, 3rd and 4th gear churches. What if we had the complete transmission with, I love your word earlier,
Right.
progression. We have the progression of gears in order to have the full complement of a sense of spirituality and soul health. So if you were to describe some charismatic gears, either as a Christian charismatic, as a person, individual, or also as a charismatic church, what gears, those 4th and 5th gears, would you describe? What are some disciplines or practices that would look like a charismatic gear?
I guess the celebration in worship.
Yeah, that gathering together.
The celebration in worship.
Yeah, and expressiveness,
The
perhaps.
the way they express themselves in their worship.
And you said earlier, I would expect a charismatic worship or even individual gear to be energy.
Oh, full of energy, yes.
Yeah. And then if you were to describe contemplative gears, what would that look like?
That would be the individual in the service you're
Or
talking about?
An individual person, a Christian, or a worship service, either one.
Being very introverted, as we were talking
Yes,
about
that's
before,
perfect.
and being more personalized in their worship rather than corporate
Gotcha.
in their worship.
Yeah. And again, we're looking at integration. We're looking at balance. How can we get the best of both worlds in the same mix?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm at another podcast where we talk with worship leaders of charismatic and also contemplative worship leaders that talk about the difficulty of marrying these two things together. And that reminds me of the difficulty we had early on.
Yeah, it takes practice.
It takes practice. I want to come back to that. But
Okay.
even personally, for us as a couple, we struggled.
Yes.
We struggled to integrate the extroversion and the introversion together. I mean, when I first met you, being a sparkler, being effervescent, being the life of the party, so to speak, and then I needed that. I wanted that. But over time, well, after we got married, it was like, hey, why are you that balloon floating up there? Get down here with me. And then probably you, on the other hand, were like, hey, why don't you come up here with me?
Yeah.
Is that our experience?
Yes.
Yeah, no doubt.
I don't want to go into too much detail.
Yeah, I was baiting
That's another
you. I was
podcast
baiting you into that. But that idea of often couples struggle with that,
Yeah.
and we as Christian faith traditions struggle with that as well.
Well, I was Pentecostal. I was Church of God my entire life. You coming from no background at all and introducing this to me, it was almost like, well, wait a minute. this is not this does not fit. It's not a good fit.
Okay,
So-
so you are a charismatic, extrovert charismatic, but you're balancing yourself. Talk to me about some contemplative practices some contemplative gears you're working on or trying to embrace.
Well, based on your description of my personality, you'll understand this. Silence. I am not good at sitting in silence.
Yeah.
I do see the importance of it. I recognize that it will take me to a deeper place, and I want that, but I struggle with it. And I don't know if it's a personality thing or if it's how I was raised with regard to Pentecost, but I struggle with sitting in silence. My mind is a 3-ring circus all the time. I've got a lot of things going on all the time. And so to sit in silence, now, I do recognize that the Lord can speak to me. He knows my personality. He created me. He can speak to me with my 3-ring circus going on. However, he also, there's a piece of sitting in silence, just being in his presence, that is very beautiful, and there's depth to that. So I want that, but I struggle.
Yeah, so if I hear you correctly, silence for you takes practice.
It takes a lot of practice, yep.
Yeah, and I'm thinking of myself right now, and
That's the easiest thing for you, isn't it? To sit in silence.
I thought we weren't going to talk about
Oh, yeah,
that.
we're not. Go ahead.
That's another
Move
podcast.
forward.
Well, for me, yes, my introverted personality naturally defaults to something quiet and slow. But your personality of extroversion naturally defaults to something more loud or fast.
Energized.
Energized, and I'm more of a de-energized person. And the other day it was interesting because you mentioned, I came in, I said, "Oh, you're watching this?" She said, "No, I just need some noise. I just need some activity."
I started to say that a while ago, and I thought, no, I don't want to divulge that about my
Well,
personality.
you said, "Oh, I'm sorry about that. I didn't know that was something you wanted to keep secret, but it's out there
Yes,
now.
I need
You
noise.
get energy, you need noise, you need activity. So that's your extroversion coming out. And so, it's interesting. In the beginning, I always sensed a tension between us when we were young marrieds and we were quiet in the car, like, oh no, there's silence. And you probably felt it. You're like, there's no conversation going on here. Where's the conversation?
That's okay. I've got my 3-ring circus going on now, so
Yes. All right.
keeps
Okay.
me going.
Okay. So I'm thinking, oh no, we're in silence. There's nothing to talk about. How can I enter her 3-ring circus and be a part of the act? But over time, you and I have learned to feel quite comfortable not having to make noise.
Yeah.
To be quiet with each other.
To be in each other's presence, and that be enough.
My goodness. That's so fantastic.
To practice.
Yes, and that's the practice of being able to be in God's presence, and that be enough.
And that be enough.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
How can we learn or practice the quiet space? I mean, married couples have to get there, have to get to that place. How can we practice embracing silence and just being in each other's presence is enough? But then also, I love the energy that you bring, and I love the energy of being a part of the corporate worship experience and being with other people, and I'm learning and developing my own charismatic gears. You're learning silence, and I'm learning expressiveness and trying to engage and be more talkative. And I don't know if you've noticed, but nowadays, I can be a lot more talkative personally with you in our marriage, but also with other people.
Sure.
In those places.
Yes, I've noticed that for sure. I've noticed in the pastorate that we kind of switched places to a degree,
wow, yeah.
where I felt like it was my responsibility to get everybody connected and I found myself kind of going into the background and you being out front and being very comfortable in talking with anyone and everyone.
That's fantastic. And it reminds me of my own journey of maturity. There was a long time in my life and my ministry where I believed that my personality was the way everyone should be.
I know.
We're not talking about that. So the idea of everyone needs to become more like me. And I was very, very resistant to change. And I would resist that. And when people talked about, when they were saying, Steve, why don't you smile more? Why don't you engage more? Why do you seem like you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders? Because the weight of the world is on my shoulders. I would feel the nobility of that. And then the Lord brought to my attention that, hey, the way that you are is not necessarily the way that I want you to be.
Right.
So what if we opened ourselves to developing our personality rather than saying, hey, I am what I am, like that old Popeye cartoon. Instead of entrenching ourselves in that and saying, I'm not moving, I am how I am. Well, what if your personality is not all that attractive because it's imbalanced?
And also, on my side of it, there was the betrayal. I did not want to betray my upbringing.
Yeah.
I did not want to betray my Pentecostal roots. And bringing that into that, it was so foreign to me. It was just foreign.
Yeah.
And what are you trying to do, make me Catholic?
Oh, yeah. That's excellent.
And so not realizing the value of that because I didn't want to betray that upbringing.
Yeah. I didn't have any sense of betrayal other than I'm betraying myself. I'm inauthentic.
Right. And I'm loyal. I'm very loyal to my friendships, to my whatever it is. I'm a part of my traditions, yes. And I love the Pentecostal world, and I love the Church of God. And so I didn't want to change that.
Yeah, so you had to come from your high gears to embrace or develop or practice some...
Seeing the value.
That's
seeing
fabulous.
the value of that.
Yeah, that's fabulous. The value of the contemplative end.
Correct.
The value of the lower gears.
Correct.
And then the contemplative recognizing the value of the higher gears. And saying, so how can we develop a soul transmission that's got this progression of gears?
Be open.
Yeah.
Be open.
Fantastic. Let's talk about a contemplative practice that's often not a part of the charismatic world and not a part of the evangelical world much, and that is the idea of Sabbath. So embracing Sabbath. Now, Sabbath is traditionally understood as low gear.
Right.
First and second gear. We're going to stop all this momentum, all this frenetic pace.
Well, that's the biblical translation of that or definition of that. But in my upbringing, Sabbath was Sunday morning, going to church on Sunday. And as a pastor's kid, it was so incongruent. It made absolute no sense to me because it was the most stressful day of our week. And so that never made sense to me, but we were keeping it holy because we went to church.
Yeah.
So
Pete Scazzaro has this incredible line where he talks about our modern day Pharaoh of busyness is shaming us into draining our souls of energy. You know, that whole idea of we've got to be fast, go, go. And then to think that Sabbath is even faster. For you, having to go to church meant everything ramps up. Everything concentrates together. It's show day. It's time to...
We're keeping it holy. I actually talked with a pastor not too long ago, and he said, I'm just so tired.
Oh, yeah.
And I said, well, what are you doing about Sabbath? And he said, oh, well, we don't do that anymore. You know, we go to church on Sunday. Sabbath is not a practice because we're not Jewish, that kind of thing. And I said, well, what about the other 9 commandments? Are you keeping those?
Yeah.
And so he was kind of taken aback by that. So
yeah, we're going to have another podcast where we talk about Sabbath in a more theological terms, about that 4th commandment and whether or not it's binding or not binding and what's the wisdom of it and all of that. But in our own journey, tell me a little bit about your journey of saying, okay, it's Sunday, that's Sabbath.
Yeah.
But you've had an expanded understanding now
Yes.
of Sabbath. Tell us a little bit about that journey.
Well, I've already told you a little bit about, being raised in a pastor's home, and Sunday morning was our Sabbath, and it was exhausting. We did take naps in the afternoon, so that was, that was good. But I think being introduced to the true definition of Sabbath with regard to you and I was life-changing for us, even in our marriage.
Yeah.
It was beautiful because it was a day that I had you completely to myself.
Now, why wouldn't you have me completely to yourself?
Because I was, there's just so much competition for church work, church responsibility. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I mean, that's who we are. We're pastors, and it's a noble career, and I loved it. But to do that every day and to have to compete with that as a family and as a wife, it's just sad.
Yeah.
It's just sad.
I'm with you.
And so when we started practicing Sabbath, I had you completely to myself, and we did things that were restorative.
Yeah.
They were not church-related or work-related, I should say.
Yeah, that's good.
And we did things that we enjoyed. Now, we still kept it holy.
Yeah.
There was still time for prayer. Now, you and I are different with regard to our prayer life. I'm very fluid in that. I can be riding down the road and see something beautiful and say, thank you, God, for that. That is so we thank you for, and forgive us for messing this world up, you know. And so, but we still did that. There was still prayer time. There was still Bible reading. You would turn on the TV and listen to Pete, what's his last name? Scazzaro.
Or Dallas Willard.
Yeah. And I would go off
Slow,
and do
quiet.
something more energetic.
Yes.
But it was beautiful. I remember it was difficult, though, at first. It took a lot of practice riding down the road on Sabbath, and I would think, I forgot to tell him about this. Somebody came up to me and said, and I would start at church.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, so forth and so on needed me to say. And then I would go, I'm sorry, never mind, that's tomorrow.
Yes, being able to stop. Just stop it. Stop working. I love the idea of Sabbath in the creation story, that God worked all this way, and then he made human beings. And the first thing they did together on their first full day was Sabbath. Rest.
They rested. Even God rested.
And out of that, now I'm convinced God doesn't really need rest. He's not like worn out.
Right.
But
it was an example.
He modeled. Yeah, perfect. He modeled rest is where you begin. We work or live out of rest, we don't rest out of exhaustion. We work out of rest and restoration. Now, some people might be thinking, oh man, Sabbath is, I can't do Sabbath because all it is sitting around all day, on our knees, open Bible, praying, for 24 hours. That's not our experience.
That's exhausting. That would be very depressing for me.
Yes, but talk about our Sabbath and what we do.
Oh, my goodness. We make a plan, first of all. You have to plan. If you don't plan, you'll fail. Yeah. So we plan either to go on a little trip, a day trip. My thing is I truly love antiquing, and you go with me on that, whether you want to or not.
It's restorative for me. I love to watch you antique shop.
So I love it. We plan our meal. We go out to eat usually on that day, but if we can't go out to eat, finances were at times difficult. We would plan ahead and on how we would cook together.
Yeah, and cooking together, I love grilling. Yeah. And you love me grilling.
I do.
Good. I wanted affirmation there, guy thing. But I want to grill, and so I would like get excited about grilling on Sabbath because I was going to take time. It was the only real time I had to smoke a brisket. I really can't smoke a brisket on a work day. So Sabbath was, I get to prep, I get to prepare. I'm going to make this great meal. That's restorative to me. Now, for many people, cooking may be unrestorative or draining.
Right.
Antique shopping may be like,
Well, let's talk about for families with small children. You have to be very creative. Yes. It's not like this is the only way you can do Sabbath. You have to be very creative. We actually did a video on that for some of our families in our church who had small children, because he taught very extensively on Sabbath. And some of them would come up, how are we going to do that? We have small children. And so there are ways to do it. You have to be creative, but it can be done.
That video, if you're wondering, is on a site called ministryoasis.com. It's a free site. LaDon and I curate that for the soul health of ministers in particular. But if you're a non-minister or professional minister and you're a lay minister, you can certainly access ministryoasis.com as well and access that video where we go into depth about how to have Sabbath with small children. It's very creative and flexible. And I got to say, I don't know about you, but I regret that we didn't start earlier with our kids. You also?
Oh, yes. If we had been knowledgeable about this, and the depth of it when our kids were younger, I think it would have been very different in our home. Very different.
Yeah, oftentimes our family seemed exhausted.
Yeah.
We were worn out. Our kids were going to school. We were immersed, and ministry is immersive.
Yes.
And so it fills up like expansion foam. It fills up every nook and cranny of your life.
Right.
And our kids were feeling that. And so we needed a time to flop down in God's presence and just relax.
How beautiful if you could start now with small children and teach them. I heard you say one time, you told a story about a gentleman who, when they knew it was, I think Saturday was their Sabbath.
Yeah, it was a Jewish man.
And on Friday, their family became giddy.
Yeah, the kids were giddy. They couldn't wait for Sabbath.
They couldn't wait because they had Dad's full attention.
Yes.
They had the family's full attention.
Yes.
And I love that.
Yes,
I hate that.
It really promotes a sense of deep connectedness in family.
Yes.
But it's generally understood by charismatics as some kind of contemplative tradition, that we don't do that. We
Sunday.
We go to church on Sunday, but getting up in the morning at church and getting the kids together and rushing off often feels incredibly draining.
It can be.
What if a day was not your ministry day, but what if your day was different than that? You could wake up slow, ease into your day, go about differently, doing different things, and that would be restorative to you. Yeah. And we'll have a whole lot more on our Sabbath podcast about that. But I want to move on to something else that I think is important. We'll talk a little bit about, and that is the practice of covenant groups. Now, this small group idea is a little more charismatic than it is contemplative. It's for the contemplative more because getting together in small groups for covenantal reasons and relationships is something that charismatics are embracing more and more and more. And we've had a couple different experiences with covenant groups. Talk about our experience with a covenant group.
Well, you and I were invited into a covenant group in Delmarva, D.C. when we were pastoring there. And it was a group of about, I think there were five of us, five couples that would get together. And we came together. We shared each other's burdens. We prayed for each other. We were like-minded. Yeah. We all were pastors and pastors' wives. So we knew where the other was coming from. It was a time to get away together. And we had fun. I mean, it wasn't just prayer and, all of that. It was a lot of fun. I mean, we went go-kart riding. We went to the beach. We had breakfast on the beach. Yeah. But it was a time to get away and share each other's burdens and develop a deep relationship with like-minded people. Yeah. And we really grew to love that group. I miss that group terribly. And it wasn't just for that specific time that we were together. I even now am on a thread with them. Even though several of us have left Delmarva, D.C., I'm still on a text thread with them and able to pray with them. One of them their daughter had some health issues. We prayed with them. One of our pastor's wives has a health issue, and we're praying with her. And every time we're at the General Assembly, we try to get together, or if we go up to visit, we try to get together. So it's a beautiful experience.
Yeah, I can't imagine doing life alone.
You're alone, if you're a pastor and a pastor's wife.
Yeah, many Christians, because of the frenetic pace of our life, charismatic or contemplative, we do life kind of alone. And so looking for opportunities to covenantally connect where you're able to bring contemplative and charismatic practices into that covenant group to make it rich and meaningful is pretty powerful. We would encourage in our covenant group where we would go away together, we would start off with silence and solitude in the morning, take a walk on the beach by yourself or go find a quiet place to pray. And then we would come together for sacraments of communion. And then we would get into worship and get really vibrant and active and lay hands on each other and pray for one. So we were attempting to blend all that together.
You did blend it, yeah.
Now there's one other aspect that if you don't have couples that you can connect with, you've done something unique with girlfriends.
There was a time in our pastorate where I felt very alone. As a pastor's wife, and if you are a pastor's wife, you will understand this. If you're not a pastor's wife, you will not get it at all. But you really needed, I really needed other like-minded friends. And so I thought, I'm going to start this group. And I'm going to pray about it, and then the Lord is going to give me the names of the people that I want to be a part of this group. So I started praying. It took me a year to put it together.
Wow.
And I prayed, and I said, God, who do you want to be a part of this pastor's wives group with me? I wanted people that we had history together. I wanted people that were like-minded. Now, I will tell you that and the Lord gave me 7 names.
Yeah.
And we started getting together. And we've been getting together for 12 years now.
Wow.
And we go away. At first it was once a year, then it was twice a year, and then grandbabies got involved. And so now it's back to once a year.
Yeah.
But we are very different. We're all Pentecostal, but we're all from different kind of styles and worship. But yet we come together, we respect our differences. But it's not a bashing group. We don't come together and it is a time of sharing each other's burdens. We pray together. We lay hands on each other. We eat meals together.
Yeah.
We have fun together.
Yeah.
And it has been my lifeline. It has been my lifeline.
Something that I know about your group that I hear you talk about is that some of the group members bring some very charismatic elements to the table. But other members of the group bring contemplative elements to the table.
True.
Even you. I mean, you've brought to that charismatic group of women, you've brought things like silence and solitude. You've brought things like visio divina, staring at something and having soul staring and what the Lord's speaking to you out of. That's a very contemplative practice. But they've embraced it?
They have embraced it. You have to realize there's 7. Their 7 personalities are all different.
Yeah.
We have some introverts. We have some extroverts. And like I said, we have some that come from the prophetic type of worship style. Some that are from the, very charismatic. Others, anyway, it's just all over the place. But it's still Pentecostal. And the personalities come together and we respect each other's personalities. And it's been a growing experience. I have grown spiritually from it.
Yeah, I think we can hear today this idea of integration, this idea of not living alone, but looking for counterbalances, even in our personality, looking for counterbalances in our worship expression as not something to resist, but something to embrace. And I would say that even your friends getting together and our covenant group experience, we benefited from the diversity of this range, these different gears that are brought to the table. And this notion of a soul transmission that has a range of gears that you can progress through. Yeah. And then the practices of the charismatic practices of getting together in big groups and energy and high gear worship.
Right.
But yet also having the gears in your worship to be soft or quiet and slow, but also fast and loud at times, individually and also as a church in worshiping. So as we wrap up today in this charismatic, contemplative idea of extroversion and introversion and how it can come together in beauty. And I would say our marriage is, to me, a beautiful example of 2 very, very different people from very different ends of the personality perspective coming together and integrating and finding respect and admiration and utility in each other's differences.
Yes.
Rather than saying, you need to change and become like me. No, you need to change and become like me. We've learned to see each other's differences as assets and not liabilities.
I agree.
So, just to wrap up today, is there any kind of final concluding thought that you might like to bring to the table and say, here's my final word on this subject?
I guess my final word would be open to the contemplative if you're charismatic.
Yeah.
Be open to the charismatic if you're contemplative, because there is room for both in your life, in your spiritual life, because I feel like there is growth in that. I think that if you remain in my Pentecostal, if I had remained in my Pentecostal world only in third and fourth gear, I think I would have missed out. I would have missed out on some depth and some growth, some spiritual growth there. And again, I have not arrived. Please, I am still struggling and still working toward that.
And I know you're not saying that charismatics don't have depth, but it's just a different kind of depth.
And I shouldn't even use the word depth, because charismatic is definitely a deep sense of worship. I would just say growth. Or
richness.
Rich, that's the word.
Richness?
I would say there's a richness, yes. Forgive me for using that word depth. There is a richness that is brought into it.
Yeah.
Yes. But the same goes for the contemplative.
Yes.
Don't be stuck in your silence and solitude, because there is a richness in the expressive worship of the Pentecostal traditions.
Yes.
So I think be open. And don't feel like you're betraying either one.
Yeah, I love that. That's fantastic. Just grateful that you've joined us today on the Charismatic Contemplative Podcast, where the loud and fast meet the quiet and slow. And I hope that you've benefited from this discussion today on introversion and extroversion and how it relates to our spiritual life and the full development of our soul, the holistic development of our soul. Lee University thanks you. The School of Theology and Ministry thank you. And I thank you for joining us today. God bless.
The opinions or beliefs expressed in this podcast do not necessarily represent the opinions or beliefs of the Church of God or Lee University. For more information, contact Steve Hall at shall@leeuniversity.edu. Thank you for joining the Charismatic Contemplative Podcast. May your fast and loud embrace the slow and quiet. It's not either or, it's both and.